We've made it. It is game week, a game week edition, the first of three, if I do say so, episodes of In Touch with Indiana Sports leading up to kickoff of Indiana's week one matchup against Florida International. Glad to have you on board. Hope you had a fantastic weekend. I did. I enjoyed my birthday. I know I mentioned that last week. I was excited about getting to kick off week 0 and having that coincide with my birthday. Kind of I said it was perfect for me. So I enjoyed my time watching some college football. Hopefully you enjoyed whatever it is you did this weekend. Maybe you took in some college football. Maybe you went to the lake. Maybe you went and had some fun with some friends or something like that. Maybe you caught up with an old buddy. The possibilities are endless for what you could have done this weekend. And I may not even be in the ballpark of what you may have done or the things that you might have gotten into in this weekend that just happened in late August. But we're here, guys. It is game week. College football season is here. Whether or not you watch week 0 games or not, I know those aren't always everybody's cup of tea. For some reason, a lot of people that I've interacted with, especially people who are older than me, and I'm not necessarily talking about older people, like people who are maybe in their 50s or 60s, because most people in my business, for the most part, are older than me. But even those who are just maybe 5 to 10 years older than me, they think this whole idea of week 0 is stupid, and they should just call it week 1. But I don't know. For some reason, I've always liked the name week 0. I think I don't know. Maybe it just sounds kind of futuristic, and maybe that's just, I don't know. I don't really have a specific reason on why I enjoy the name or enjoy even having it, because I guess it really is just a teaser of getting you ready, kind of sticking your toe in for the rest of the slate that's coming up, because week 1 is massive. There are tons of midweek games. There's Thursday games. There's Friday games, even especially Saturday, and even on Sunday games. There's a lot to take in this weekend if you're a college football fan. But I took in some college football this weekend, and I want to preface this by actually, first of all, I got to shout out somebody real quick. So, as usual, I've got my coffee with me, and I don't know if I mentioned this on Out of Touch or if I mentioned it on this show, but I was talking about a specific coffee that I had whenever I went to Delaware with my wife. It's a brown sugar flavored coffee. And somebody was listening to me, my mother, and for my birthday, she had it shipped from the coffee shop in Delaware to here in Kentucky, and gave this brown sugar coffee from Notting Hill Cafe, I think that's what it was called, as a birthday gift. And that's what I'm consuming this morning. And wanted to give a shout out to my mom for that, because it was very thoughtful and I was very surprised by it. And I'm here to enjoy some today and probably until it runs out, because I love it. It's good stuff. As I take a sip right there. But anyway, I wanted to get that out of the way before I forgot. And let me go ahead and get back into what I was going to say with week 0. For those of you who watched any of last week's episodes, I guess specifically on Friday, I think I made my picks for what I would have done if I had bet on this week's games. So just to be clear, I did make picks, like I said, but I did not wager any money, because, as I've said before, I think betting on week 0 games is usually just a trap to lose money, because there's not a lot to pick. There's not a lot to choose from. And usually the games you're choosing from aren't normally teams that you follow very closely, at least and again, it all depends on where you're at and who you really pay close attention to. But for the majority of Americans, or the majority of people who are consuming these games, you likely don't know a whole lot about each of these teams that you're watching, if you decide to watch all of them, of course. But I made predictions for each game, and everything that I would have bet on, had I wagered it, would have hit. And that's a sad day for me, because I should have, what I should have done? I should have realized, Saturday was my birthday. It was going to bring the good juju, the good vibes. And I should have put a little small wager, maybe even a parlay. I mean, a parlay would have really come through big, but I would have taken, for those of you who may have missed it, I was going to take the under in the Georgia Tech Florida State game. That was set, I believe, at 55 or so, and that easily hit. It was mid 40s, I believe, the total 24 to 21, whatever that adds up to be, I think is 45, something like that. That would have hit. I would have taken New Mexico to cover against Montana State. They were underdogs in that game. Montana State was favored, I believe, by 14 and a half or so before it was all said and done. They only won by 4, so that would have hit. I was going to take Nevada to cover against SMU. SMU was heavy favorites in that game, I believe around 25 or so. SMU only won that game by 5 points, so that would have hit. And then finally, Hawaii was favored to beat Delaware State by about 40 points, and they only won by 21. So I feel kind of dumb. I mean, not dumb for being correct, of course, but dumb for not actually wagering. Because here's what's going to happen. I'm going to actually put some skin in the game this week, and all my crap is going to miss. I don't mean to call it crap. I know that's not really a swear word, but all my bets, the fact that I was 4-0 and refused to wager, it just feels like, I don't know. I got to still be confident with my picks. I can't overthink it. But we'll do picks again later this week, obviously. When we get to Friday, I'll pick from 3 or 4 matchups and let you know what I'm going to go with. And maybe you can bet along with me. Especially, I mean, why not, right? I'm 4-0. Not to toot my own horn, as I've now mentioned here a few times. I am clearly doing that. But I'm also kicking myself in the foot because I could have made a little extra bank this weekend. And again, obviously I wouldn't have bet the mortgage. So, I mean, I could have. And I would have won a whole lot more, but there's no way I would ever bet that kind of money. So anyway, just a little tidbit from this weekend. For those of you who may have missed some of the results of the games, especially the biggest game of the week, we had an upset to kick things off. Georgia Tech knocks off Florida State 24-21. I don't think we could have asked for a better result or a better product, I should say, for an opening game for college football in Ireland. The environment was great. The stadium they played in looked beautiful. I believe it was called Aviva Stadium in the Aer Lingus College Football Classic. And it's what makes this upset for Florida State all the more poetic is if you followed along with anything that's happened with them in the offseason. Florida State has been one of the whiniest college football programs in the entire sport since the moment they were left out of the college football playoff. And I know that they did what they were supposed to do. They went undefeated, and they unfortunately lost their star quarterback, and the committee thought that that was enough, even though they were undefeated, to leave them out of the 14 playoff. And that could be debated until the end of time. But here's the thing. They played Georgia in a non-playoff game after they were left out and lost that game by like 60 points. And that may be an exaggeration, but they got the doors knocked off of them, blown off of them, however you want to say it, in that game following being left out of the playoff. And then also during the offseason, they decide they want to sue the ACC or the NCAA, one of the two, may have even been both, for the fact that they can't get out of their contract with the ACC to be able to go to a different conference because they think they're too good to be in the ACC. Well, guess what? You're clearly not good enough to beat Georgia Tech as a top 10 team. And I got to say this too. I know preseason polls, as I've mentioned several times, don't mean hardly anything. So them being top 10 right now, they may not even be a ranked team the rest of the season. Who knows? But when you lose their starting quarterback and you lose almost everybody who was on that team that was undefeated, yeah, you bring in some guys, you don't know how they're going to mix together and that kind of thing. So it's all just kind of random. Who in their right mind just thought that automatically made Florida State a top 10 team again? Or is it people just trying to pull the sympathy thing and say, you know what? They were good last year. Let's just give them the benefit of the doubt and stick them in the top 10 or that type of thing. I'm sure it wasn't that simple, but nice little poetic justice to kind of have Florida State. And I know here's what's great about taking a loss like that in this new era of college football. Normally, a loss like that would bury a team like Florida State and make it nearly impossible for them to go to the college football playoff without winning the rest of their games. Now, they're not going to be able to mess up a whole lot more, but there's a little bit more breathing room these days as opposed to whenever you would take a loss and that would really hurt your chances to get into the college football playoff, where now you can probably, depending on your strength of schedule, you can probably afford maximum up to 3 losses. And again, that varies because there's not a whole bunch of 3-loss teams will get in the playoff, but maximum 3 losses will give you at least a shot at the college football playoff, where normally 1 loss would, for some teams, bury you. In other teams, you could afford a loss. And again, and even on the rare occasion, especially if you're in the SEC, a second loss. But that's where you're at. Losses don't define an entire season anymore. So Florida State will have a chance to bounce back. And so there you go. That's how that game went. And I don't know if anybody else took in New Mexico or Montana State, but a lot of people thought it was weird that an FCS team was favored. And not only did they start off favored, but that line kept moving more and more in favor of Montana State. And New Mexico ended up leading for nearly the entirety of that game until Montana State, I almost said raided back. I don't think that's a phrase. Until Montana State came roaring back. How about that? Especially because they're the Bobcats, I believe. Came roaring back in the fourth quarter to what many people, without looking at a spread, would probably see as an upset, because it is an FCS program going up against an FBS program. But apparently New Mexico is dog duty. And I wouldn't be surprised if they were favored by that many, or I should say underdogs by that many, against a program that they normally should take care of business. New Mexico may be the worst team in FBS football this year. So shout out to the Lobos, I guess. Didn't watch a whole lot of the SMU Nevada game. I do know there was a scuffle. There was some fighting going on at some point during that game. So unfortunate to see that happen. And then if you're a part of the Sickos committee and you decided to stay up late for Hawaii and Delaware State, then props to you. You were treated to a 35-14 victory by the Rainbow Warriors over the Hornets, and Delaware State packed their bags with a nice fat check to head back home. Because that's what those games are. When you are that type of a program, you're that small, and you're going on the road that far away, you're going there to pick up a check, take a beating, and head back to your place of interest, wherever it is they're from. Obviously, they're from Delaware. So, and again, shout out to that Delaware coffee shop. That sounds like I'm doing an advertisement by saying that and then taking a sip every time that I mention it. But I wish I could take more pauses to drink it, because it's good stuff. Brown sugar coffee, man. Even if you don't try it from there, it's good stuff. So I'm happy about that. One other thing I want to mention, too, before I move on from these games specifically. There were some audio gaffes with the FS1 broadcast during the Montana State New Mexico game. And for some reason, I don't know what it is with FS1, and I love the Fox Sports networks, and I feel like they do put on a really good product 90% of the time. But FS1 specifically, it seems like they always have early season issues with getting their broadcast figured out, and there's nothing wrong with that. It happens to the best of us, and I totally understand being in the world of this type of thing, broadcasting, And I want to just play. So this is just a 23-second clip of just the on-air talent thinking they're off the air, but not really being off the air. And I'll just let it roll, and we'll react to it afterward.
As caught by Rohan Jones, number 8.
Can you hear me?
Sort of a do-it-all tight end fullback type. They'll give him 3, and it'll be a punt formation coming for Montana State.
Can anybody hear me?
We have no audio whatsoever. Is that right? As caught.
And it's just funny because clearly this came through on the broadcast, but something happened on their end to where they couldn't hear each other. Therefore, they thought they weren't going over the air. And I'll tell you what, that's a scary thing, because you never know what may come out of some people's mouths whenever they think they're off the air, but they really aren't. So yeah, that's one thing I was taught, and I'm sure most people are taught in this business, is always assume the mic is hot. as in on the air, that no matter what you say, even if you think it's off, even if it looks like it wouldn't go over the air, they teach you to just always, if you're around a microphone, always assume it's on. This is a good rule of thumb to go by. You don't want to say something stupid. You don't want to accidentally say some swear words over the air, or hopefully nothing worse than that if you were to do something along those lines. But yeah, just wanted to share that little clip because that probably won't be the last time, especially from FS1, that we see stuff like that. So we'll go ahead and leave that at that as our little week 0 recap, because it is game week for Indiana football, of course. I'm not going to lie. I'm kind of surprised it took me this long to really get into Indiana football. Didn't realize how much I was going to react to week 0. But one thing that we're going to do here in just a moment, Kyler Staley is going to pop in, and he and I had a great chat about some Indiana football as we get ready for the game to take place this Saturday. And I can't believe it's finally here. I can't believe we are finally going to see what a Kurt Cignetti football team is going to look like in Memorial Stadium. And they're going to do so against the FIU Panthers, or maybe we can call them now the FIU Fighting Pit Bulls. And I'm not referring to the dog. I'm referring to the singer or the rapper, whatever you want to call him, considering he is a partner with FIU. I doubt he will be in attendance in Bloomington this weekend. That would be something if he did show up. But yeah, nonetheless, Pitbull is not an endorser. He's got the NIL partnership where they name the stadium after him now. And, we talked about that a few weeks ago, so I won't dive back into that. But I guess without further ado, I'll go ahead and bring in our man Kyler Staley from HoosierIllustrated.com, and I'll let that roll right here. Joining me now here on a Monday on In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com, it is basketball recruiting analyst Kyler Staley. Welcome in, my friend.
What's going on, my guy? How's everything going?
Going great. Enjoyed a birthday weekend. I enjoyed some college football, and I got to share this real quick with you, Kyler, because I'm pretty upset. So at the end of last week's show, I shared what my betting picks would have been for week 0. And I didn't physically bet anything. I held off from week 0 because I just feel like it's kind of a bait weekend. They try to get you to, it's been a while. If you're a college football bettor, I'm saying, you know what? I'm staying away. I'm probably not going to have any correct, or at least a lot of correct guesses when it comes to betting. And the 4 picks that I made all hit, and I didn't bet on a single one of them. And I was pretty pissed off about it the other day.
That's how betting works, my friend. That's how it's always going to work. Vegas wins at the end, no matter if you bet or not. They're always going to win. They're always
because I'll actually bet this weekend for week 1, and I guarantee you I won't have that same kind of luck. There's no way. I mean, 4-0. I mean, unless you're just a gambling guru and you're maybe kind of a genius with it. Some people can somehow make a living off of it. I mean, maybe they can do it, but I'm just your average Joe. I do it for fun. Yep. And it just seems like I'm off to a bad start by having the correct answers, but not being able to put pen to paper and actually put the money on the line for it this weekend.
I think with betting it comes down to just confidence at the end of the day. You just got to, whatever you feel good about and everything, not second guess it, and just, put your money where your mouth is for the most part. So there are those guys out there that do make a living off of that. But yeah, I mean, it's just a beast that you just don't want to deal with.
It is.
So,
it is.
Like I said, Vegas always wins at the end. Let me ask you this: Are you going to bet on the IU football game?
I thought I was going to initially, but after further, I guess, findings on Florida International and seeing that they've actually been picked to finishing in the top 3 in the Conference USA, I believe, which is higher than I expected them to be picked.
Mm-hmm.
That 21-point spread, I don't know if it shifted any since I last looked at it, but I feel like that could be right on the money because it is week 1.
Yeah.
And I guess we can go ahead and kind of dive into Indiana football in a second since you asked that question. But we're probably, even if Cignetti's got the tools in his back pocket and this thing's ready to take off here in a few weeks, there's going to be rust no matter what. It doesn't matter who the head coach is. Doesn't matter who the players are. There's going to be that week 1 rust, and there's going to be little blips here and there where maybe Indiana lets Florida International get a score or 2 that maybe they weren't supposed to get. So that's why, back to your initial point, I guess with the betting spread, I don't know that I'm going to touch Indiana this weekend. It'd be tough to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point. Week 1 is just there's some ugly football week 1. We'll say that. So, and that's just with any game, across the whole day on Saturday. I mean, it's just teams are still trying to figure it out a little bit and stuff. It's very early in the season, obviously. I always go back to last year. Really, you look at Indiana versus Ohio State. I mean, Ohio State, obviously one of the best teams, best programs in the country. And Indiana gave them a game for the most part, I would say, and that was just strictly because, obviously Indiana wasn't good. But Ohio State was also trying to figure things out as well. I remember they had a little bit of a quarterback thing going on last year where they were still trying to figure that out as well. So yeah, you just don't know what to expect when it comes to week 1 versus any opponent, with any matchup. I think Cignetti said, there's no film on FIU. So they really don't know what to expect. It's different players, it's different roster. You just don't know what to expect. And also with Cignetti, this is a brand new team that he has. They haven't played against anybody other than themselves, practicing all through spring. And then obviously the scrimmage that was a few months ago, the inter-squad scrimmage there. So that's really the only taste that they've really had. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I still expect Indiana to take care of business this week. There's no reason why they shouldn't take care of business against FIU, but I do think there's going to be a little bit of hiccups, throughout the game and stuff. And it's just rust at the end of the day.
And there's almost some added pressure of Indiana, or on Indiana, I should say, to really put on a show, because all the talk is finally going to be put on the field. I mean, I know it's all entertainment and it's fun, but fans have come to expect already, without seeing anything, that Cignetti is going to put together a product with this Indiana football team that is, fans are going to want to consume. And I don't want to say that they only have one chance to do that, because of course it is a long season. But first impressions mean a lot in every industry, no matter what you're talking about. And if Cignetti comes out with this Indiana football team, and maybe it's a 10-point game. Maybe Florida International flirts with taking the lead and early in the second half or something like that. That's going to get Indiana fans thinking, okay, this is just same old Indiana. And by the way, I'm not predicting that this is what happens. I'm just throwing that scenario out there. Like, what if all of this hype is really just hype and there's no substance behind it? I think that's kind of sort of the cautious optimism that we've seen a lot of Indiana fans at least try to adopt going into this new Cignetti era, because there is a lot of unknowns, even though we have all this talk behind it right now.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be too concerned, honestly, and this is, me just being a little bit more optimistic with this. I wouldn't be too concerned with this game as long as it's not like a one possession game going into the fourth quarter or whatnot. I mean, a 10 plus point win, I think that's really good. At the end of the day, you're just trying to win the game, right? You're trying to figure out ways to win the game. It doesn't have to be pretty. Most wins aren't pretty for the most part. And I don't expect this game to be really pretty at all. I expect, Memorial Stadium is going to be rocking. I think there's going to be a lot of fans there. They're ready to go. But that's going to really help the energy and the atmosphere. But at the same time, Kurt Cignetti is still trying to figure things out with his team. They got a lot of work to do. They're not going to be a finished product by any means. And so Indiana fans, maybe just temper your expectations just a little bit with that. That's just my opinion. Obviously, everybody else has got a different opinion when it comes to that. But there's going to be rust at the end of the day. There's going to be rust in this game. They're still going to try to figure things out. And honestly, as long as they take care of business and it's not, coming down to the wire, I think you take that, all day.
Now, on the other side of things, ideally, let's just say Indiana really does take care of business. I think the perfect scenario, if Indiana, let's just say they blow that spread out of the water, they win this game by 4 or 5 touchdowns, something like that. It would be great if everyone's healthy, and let's just say you get an opportunity to put Taven Jackson to get him some more reps, and Curtis Rourke's able to kind of sit down and relax for the last maybe quarter or so. That's the perfect scenario. And really, when you're playing any of these early non-conference games against opponents that you should take care of, other than getting the win, the other main priority should be to stay healthy in these games. You don't want to lose anybody who's going to be needed, like a Donovan McCulley, in these bigger games down the road, like UCLA. When you travel out to California, you're going to want your big-time playmakers to be healthy whenever you're playing these guys. So, and we've talked about that UCLA game being kind of a potential turning point in the season, depending on if Indiana can take care of business in weeks 1 and 2. So outside of getting the victory, staying healthy should be the other victory that Indiana should hope for in this week 1 matchup.
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, you would love to go into the fourth quarter leading 45-0. I mean, that would be great and whatnot. So, I mean, it's very unlikely that's going to happen. I mean, you mentioned it at the start here. FIU is kind of an under the radar team and kind of an underrated team. So, they're sneaky. They can be really sneaky with this team versus Indiana. So you got to watch out for that. But yeah, I think with the quarterback situation, unless the lead is just so crazy 45-0, something like that, I don't know how much you're going to see of Taven Jackson. I really don't, because I think Indiana with Cignetti specifically, I think he's going to want to see Rourke get as many reps as possible in real game settings, because it sounds like to me he's going to be the guy, barring any injury. Hopefully that doesn't happen, obviously. He's going to be the guy, and Cignetti, has talked about the importance of sticking with one guy. Last year was kind of a joke in a lot of ways, because you were going into a game and you're like, okay, we're going to split reps at the quarterback position week one. It was just kind of a joke at the end of the day, honestly. And that's just not how Cignetti's going to run things. He's going to stick with his guy. You hope, like I said, 45-0, something like that, where it's just crazy. There's no way they're going to come back. And you start pulling out your starters like that. That would probably be the only times I would see Taven Jackson. But even if it's a 20-point game, yes. I don't even think you see Taven Jackson unless it's 40-plus points or something like that, just because you want to see Curtis Rourke get as many reps as possible.
And that's true, but I do think there is something to be said in a scenario where you are blowing them out, where you don't want to risk, somebody getting hurt. But I do see both sides of that. So again, it's a wait and see. So we'll just have to kind of, see how the game plays out whenever it all is said and done at 3:30 p.m. on Saturday in Memorial Stadium in Bloomington, Indiana. I'm excited.
Yeah, right smack dab in the middle of the day. As a college football fan, I'm kind of annoyed by it, because I would have loved to watch other games, but right smack dab in the middle of the day. So it's going to be rocking. I think Memorial Stadium, this is going to be one of the best atmospheres you're going to see in a long time at Memorial Stadium. Last year versus Ohio State was pretty good, but I think you're going to see a packed house this weekend, just because I think people are excited.
And I do believe the weather is going to work, and I know we're a week away, so that could change at the drop of a hat sometimes, if that's even a saying. That is a saying, right? At the drop of a hat. Sometimes I just make things up. But I do believe the weather is supposed to be pretty beautiful for week one college football here in, I guess, Southern Indiana. Bloomington is technically Southern Indiana, even though sometimes it doesn't seem like it. So, yeah, we'll say here in Southern Indiana.
Yeah, no, anything below Indianapolis, that's Southern Indiana. Don't let anybody fool you and stuff. I'm a Southern Indiana guy. I'm from Bedford. I mean, I was 20 minutes away from Bloomington my whole life. So that's a Southern Indiana town for sure. But yeah, it's perfect weather this weekend. I think the last time I saw it was like low 80s or whatever. So sun's going to be out, perfect tailgating weather. We know the Indiana fans love to tailgate. So it's going to be a fun atmosphere. Me personally, I'm just excited to get back into kind of that media groove. I mean, it's going to be a busy few months with basketball coming up as well. So
it's the grind. It's the beginning of the 8-month grind, which is, I mean, it sounds like a long time, but it'll fly by.
Yeah, for sure. And they talk about the players, shaking off rust. Hey, us media guys got to shake off rust too. We got to get our Twitter fingers. We got to get those all stretched out and everything. So we got to write some good stories and whatnot. But I'm excited. I really am. I'm really pumped that football's back. It's been a long waiting period. I hate that gap in between where there's no football. It just sucks at the end of the day, but it's going to be fun. I think we're in for a really exciting college football season overall. And I'm really excited to see what this new Big Ten's all about as well. And, obviously really excited to see what Kirk Cignetti can do with the Indiana Hoosiers.
And that's the thing. I would love to be able to see Indiana fans locked in from beginning to end with football, because we all know that smack dab in the middle of football season comes Hoosier hysteria and the birth of a brand new basketball season. And with that, I do want to transition into a little basketball conversation. Whenever we talked last week, the battle for Atlantis had not been announced yet, but I believe it was on Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken, that they finally unveiled the pairings for the opening round matchups for that MTE, and really how the bracket is set up for the remaining games as well. But what are kind of your initial thoughts for the Hoosiers as they'll be taking on Louisville and Pat Kelsey's squad to kick that tournament off the day before Thanksgiving?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of things that I thought of immediately when it was announced that they were going to play Louisville. One, I'm just glad that we get another Indiana-Louisville game at the end of the day. That's a very under-the-radar rivalry that I think, those two teams should always play each other, whatnot. So, obviously, they're not playing anywhere near Indiana or Kentucky, so they're going to be playing in Atlantis. So, that's kind of funny in a lot of ways. And honestly, this Louisville team, completely different Louisville team than what you've seen the last few years. Pat Kelsey's got these guys rocking. I think a lot of people are really high on them. So, it's going to be a challenge for Indiana. But, as far as draws, I think it's a pretty solid draw. When I look at all the teams, I think every game or the entire draw, I think it's really balanced at the end of the day. The way I look at it is that the committee, whoever's deciding, where to place these teams in that bracket, they view Indiana as probably a top 3, top 4 team in that bracket. So the way that they got the draw, that's kind of my opinion with that. It's just hard to say really right now what to expect. Obviously, you expect Indiana, on paper, the roster is really great. They should be one of the better teams in the Big Ten, but you just don't know about all the other teams as well. And even when that tournament happens, it's still going to be very, very early in the season. And obviously Indiana and all those teams are still going to be trying to figure out, just exactly who they are and whatnot. So as far as the draw, pretty balanced. I think it's a very, I think Indiana can take advantage with this draw. This Louisville team is going to be tough to get through. I expect Louisville fans to travel pretty well. Obviously, Indiana fans are going to travel extremely well as well. And then obviously, whatever happens. I think at the end of the day, you need Indiana. They have to win at least 2 games this
I'm
trip.
with you.
It'd be nice if they win it all, obviously. But 2 games, at the end of the day, it is a tournament. Obviously, you want to win the entire tournament. But at the end of the day, if you lose the first game and you've got 2 more games, you want to win those 2 more games because that just counts as a regular season game at the end of the day. So balanced draw, but I think Indiana can take advantage of it.
Yeah, and a lot of people, one thing I've been trying to at least inform people on with Louisville so far, for those who may be unfamiliar, most people I think are aware that Kenny Payne is no longer the head coach, but what a lot of people are unaware of is really what style Pat Kelsey likes to play and the fact that he has a completely, there are 0 returning players from Kenny Payne's squad on this upcoming Louisville team. And one familiar face that Indiana fans will recognize, and that's Chucky Hepburn, the former Wisconsin guard. So that'll be interesting to see his role with the Cardinals. I do believe he will likely be in their starting rotation. But Pat Kelsey plays the style of basketball that really a lot of Indiana fans have kind of been clamoring for. And it's a very high octane style with a lot of threes. There are times where Pat Kelsey teams will play 5 out. And that sounds a little insane. But one thing that Indiana is going to have that favors them in this matchup is size, for sure. Umar Ballo, I believe, might be 50 pounds heavier than the heaviest guy on Louisville's team. And so you're going to have a big clashing of styles in that opening round game. And it'll be really a good barometer for both teams, but also just to see for Indiana, for those who have been preaching that, especially really with Mike Woodson, can this style really prevail in this day and age of college basketball? That will be a very good early test with all the talent that Indiana has on this roster, if that's something that could really carry the Hoosiers moving forward the rest of the season.
Yeah, Pat Kelsey's style is very Tom Crean-esque, as you could say. Back in the day, Tom Crean was very, get up and down, run the floor as hard as you can, wasn't a whole lot of defense, and obviously, knock down threes. Mike Woodson's probably a little bit more balanced, but I think people often forget, even though last year Indiana was just a very slow and methodical team, Mike Woodson really does like to get out and run. That's what he wants out of his teams, and he wants guys that can get out and run. I think this Indiana team can get out and run. They've got, the guard play that can really get up and down. Miles Rice, Caden Carlisle, Gabe Cupps, Trey Galloway, those guys. They're going to push the pace as much as they can. Blake Renew, Omar Ballo, they're pretty good, rim runners as well. So that's something to watch out. So it really will just come down to, obviously, what style works at the end of the day for this game. Indiana's going to use their size. They're going to really try to, beat you in the half court setting. I think Louisville's going to obviously try to get out and run, try to beat Indiana up and down the floor. It'll be very interesting to see kind of what happens in that kind of scenario. But I think at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of points scored in this game. I think there's a lot of scoring on both sides of the ball. So we'll just see. Obviously, it's going to be a pretty tough test. I expect Louisville to be a tournament team. So if Indiana can win that game, that's going to really, really help their schedule, when it comes down to March. And the NCAA tournament committee, is looking at where Indiana falls and where they should fall. So it's all about resume boosters, and you really got to prove a lot of the doubters wrong, when it comes down to the battle for Atlantis.
Continuing into one more thing before we wrap this segment up, Jalen Haralson going to be making a visit in Bloomington for the opening week of college football. The Hoosiers hosting FIU. What do you know about this visit and how this could be an impactful weekend for him as he gets closer to his decision?
Yeah, I mean, college football obviously means college football started, but obviously on the basketball side of things, a lot of visits start piling up as well. So Indiana's been known ever since Mike Woodson's kind of, taken over as the Hoosiers head coach, to have multiple visits throughout the fall. He likes taking them to football games and whatnot. But as far as when it comes to Jalen Haralson, you can make a case that this is probably the most important visit of the fall for Indiana. Jalen Haralson's a guy that most of Hoosier Nation knows. He's been a guy that's been on Indiana's radar even before he played a single high school game. Mike Woodson, when he took over as head coach, extended an offer to him. Trent Sisley, those guys obviously have been guys that Indiana's just built really good relationships with. And multiple times Mike Woodson and his staff have made visits up to Lalu to see Jalen. And obviously they're pretty close with the family. And Jalen's been at IU multiple times for visits, but this will be the first official visit for him. And he's got a string of visits coming up as well. I think there's one at Michigan State, Notre Dame. He's got one as well. Kansas down the road. Then a few others. He's only taken one official visit, if I can remember correctly, and that was to Auburn last year. So trying to knock out as many visits as well. So it's just really nice that Indiana, when these string of 6 or 7 visits, are the very first one to get Jalen. So obviously Indiana is going to be making a push there. Jalen Haralson's a very talented point guard. He gets kind of confused. People think he's a forward. Now he's a point guard. And if you've watched him, that guy's a playmaker. He plays within himself, can really be a playmaker on the floor, and just a guy that uses his length, and obviously just an incredible unselfish passer as well. So this will be definitely a guy that Indiana's going to want, for the future, a guy that can set up plays. I think his game is very similar to Jalen Hood-Schifino in a lot of ways, and that's kind of been what their preach has been with him. So, and I know Haralson, talking to him, he's really looked at how Indiana used Jalen Hood-Schifino, and he really likes that. So it'll be pretty big. Obviously the atmosphere is going to be great, taking him to a football game. There's also a Indiana basketball alumni event. So there'll be multiple former players, in there. So they're obviously probably going to be talking to Jalen as well, wanting to get him to Indiana. So it's the start of a busy visit schedule for Indiana basketball, and you can't really pick a bigger visit to start off your calendar than with 5-star point guard Jalen Haralson.
Do you think it's vital, especially after missing out on Malachi Moreno? I know there are 2 different style of players, but do you think it's vital for Indiana to land him? I know we've talked about Trent Sisley and Braylon Mullins as well, but eventually someone's going to have to be that first domino of the 2025 recruiting class. I don't think you want to be in the situation that you put yourself in last year, where you've only got Liam McNeely. He decommits. A lot of people kind of see that as a red flag. You do get Bryson Tucker, but it was still just kind of a very awkward situation around recruiting circles. And I'm sure Mike Woodson and the rest of the staff don't want to be in that situation once again.
No, I mean, yeah, that was definitely awkward. I think that's the perfect word for that whole situation, that whole springtime. That was just, this kind of is what it is.
In so many ways.
Yeah. Obviously, there was a lot of animosity and whatnot. But yeah, back to your original question. Yes, you want to have a good group of players already committed in the fall. Luckily, the guys that they're looking at, the in-state guys, Jalen Haralson, Trent Sisley, Braylon Mullins, they're expected to commit around October, November. So you're going to find out pretty quickly where exactly they're going to land as far as college-wise, and obviously what your next step is if you're Mike Woodson, Indiana. If you can get all 3 of those guys plus maybe another guy to commit, I mean, you're sitting pretty smoothly going into spring, and obviously you just fill the gaps with transfers and see what else you have. But obviously you want to get the first domino to fall, right? And that'll be the big thing for when it comes to recruiting these guys. If they can get Jalen Haralson to commit, Braylon Mullins, Trent Sisley, they're going to see that, obviously. Trent Sisley's a guy that's actually played with Jalen Haralson before. His first couple of seasons at high school level, played with him in Indy Heat, so he obviously knows him pretty well. And I think if you're Trent Sisley, he would love to play with both Braylon Mullins and Jalen Haralson at any school that they go to as well. So it's all about getting that first domino to fall, and then the rest just come with it. So Indiana's going to be pushing. Mike Woodson's going to be really pushing to try to get a commit sooner than later. And we're just going to see with that. But obviously kids have their set schedules, their set visits as well. You really won't see the needle move a whole lot until you start seeing them cancel those visits. So that'll be something to really watch going down the whole fall season. So,
and what's crazy too is that I believe this is already happening this year. They don't have a maximum amount of official visits they can take. It's pretty much unlimited now, correct?
I think so. I'm still not fully aware of exactly what the right rule is. I think it was from what I remember, it used to be 5 official visits that you can do. A lot of the kids would only take their official visits their senior year just to knock that out. But I mean, Braylon Mullins, I know he's got 6 or 7 official visits. Same with Jalen Haralson. So, yeah, I mean, you're probably spot on with that. I'm sure it's very unlimited. So that's always a big key. Obviously, an official visit and an unofficial visit is, it's a pretty big difference at the end of the day. The school's paying for the official versus an unofficial. That's coming out of your pocket as well. So, but yeah, I mean, it's going to be big. Like I said, this is Jalen Haralson's first official visit. Which is crazy to think of the amount of times he's been in Bloomington, for games and the unofficial visits. But so this one would be a little bit more important as well. So I'm sure Indiana, Mike Wilson, they got great things lined up for him to make him really feel special.
Speaking of great things lined up, tell us what's coming up on HoosierIllustrated.com this week.
That was a great segue, by the way, before I say that. But I'm going to give you major props for that one. But, yeah, I mean, football heavy this week, right? So it's going to be, Cignetti's first game as Indiana's head coach. There's going to be a lot of football content. I know we've been texting back and forth, all of us writers as well, trying to figure out what we're going to write. So, but there'll be a lot of, basketball also sprinkled in as well. I just finished up the Luke Goody preview for the season, so that'll probably be posted at some point this weekend. And I've also written up a preview for Jalen Haralson's visit as well. So that'll probably come later this week as well. But, a lot of football content. There's going to be storylines we look at. I'll probably write the preview for Friday, so we'll have that. And then obviously we got this show. You're going to be talking a lot about football. So a lot of things are happening at HoosierIllustrated.com. So make sure, if you want to know anything about Indiana football and basketball and recruiting, make sure you check it out.
It's here. It's all here.
It's here, man. It's here, and it's about to be a busy. I mean, my schedule, I'm not even going to know what my schedule is. I'm going to take it one day at a time.
That's right. That's what we're all going to do. One day at a time. Thank you, Kyler Staley, basketball recruiting analyst from HoosierIllustrated.com. Appreciate your time, as always. Big thanks to Kyler Staley, as always, for taking the time, especially here on a Monday, getting us rolling here on another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. And I guess I'll share a few more thoughts on FIU as we get rolling here with game week as Indiana prepares to take on the Panthers. A couple thoughts. So they're led by head coach Mike McIntyre. It's his 3rd year coming up in his first 2 seasons with FIU. They were both 4-8, so nothing really to write home about. Previously, he was at Colorado and had a couple of, really not even a couple of decent seasons. He had one good season in 2016 where he was 10-4, and then prior to that, spent 3 seasons with San Jose State and had one really good year where they went 10-2. So Mike McIntyre, not a very good track record when it comes to good seasons, but he has proven that he can have a one-off here and there. And if you're looking at what this FIU team has in regard to personnel, they return Keon Jenkins, a very good dual threat quarterback that could cause some problems for Indiana, especially if Indiana has a suspect defense. Obviously, that's yet to be seen, but it is kind of historically projected, I guess I should say. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, that Indiana's defense isn't always caught up with the offense. Now, that's not been the case necessarily every time, but it is believed this year that the offense is ahead of the defense. And that does appear to be the case for FIU as well. So we may have a shootout on our hands potentially in this first game. I do believe that ultimately Indiana needs to find a way to get stops. Even if this does end up being a high-powered FIU offense, you're still playing against a group of 5 opponent. And I feel like every team in the Power 4, and really if I'm being more specific, every team in the Power 2 with the Big Ten and the SEC, you should be able to take care of most of these group of 5 teams. Now, I know that not all group of 5 teams are created equally, but FIU, unless they're planning to take a major step forward this year, Indiana needs to find a way to not only win this game, but if you can cover that spread, I do believe it was around 21. I know I tend to talk a lot about spreads. It makes it sound like I'm a gambling addict. I don't gamble a lot. I just like it. I think it's fun. I like looking at spreads and seeing what teams hit and what they don't. I think that part of it's really fun, but I don't have the means to be gambling a ton. I just like to talk about it and how it affects football and basketball, all that kind of stuff. Just for in case those are who may be concerned. And I mainly say that for family who are listening. I don't want family members listening and going, man, is my grandson or is my, son, whoever it may be, is he is he getting into the gambling? Is he putting a lot of money on the line and not telling nobody? I promise it's not happening. I know I'm being silly with that, but for some reason, I felt like I needed to address it, especially because I've talked a decent amount about gambling already today. I just enjoy the idea of what it brings to college football and college basketball. And I did mention I didn't bet on anything last week too. So anyway, I was talking about a shootout possibilities. And that very well may be the case of what happens, but I do think Indiana needs to find a way, hopefully early on. If not so, they need to, at some point in the game, find a rhythm, not only on offense, but on defense. The defense needs to get confidence in this game. If Indiana finds themselves in a 42-35 game, yeah, you want to get the win, but it's also doesn't look good for your defense, especially when you think about playing better opponents in the Big Ten that will have better defenses more than likely. So this will be a good first test for the Hoosiers. I do wish that they were playing the FCS opponent first, because what I hate about next week is the fact that you're going to be taking a step down in competition, and you're really not going to learn a whole lot about the team in week 2, because the same thing happened last year. If you remember, Indiana faced Indiana State in week 2 right after playing Ohio State, and that's just eons apart when it comes to competition. I felt like in both of those games, it was tough to learn about Indiana because you're playing against a team who was significantly better than you, that you knew you had no realistic shot in beating. And then you're facing a team that it was the opposite. Indiana State had no business playing you, or, obviously they're coming for the check. That's what those FCS programs are doing. But they have no business being in that type of game, and they weren't. And so we didn't really learn anything about Indiana until we got to their matchup against Louisville. And they were down 21-0 in that game, came back and nearly won, had a chance to tie it up at the goal line, weren't able to do that. But that's what does kind of stink about the way the schedule sometimes plays out. And when you have the FCS opponent in week 2, I don't know, man. And I'm sure some of you feel similar ways, or feel a similar way that I do. The FCS opponent is, I don't want to say pointless, because I know why they do it. But I wish you had to play them in week 1, or the alternative that I've explored before, make it a preseason game, or play them in the spring instead of playing yourself in the spring game. I know that would be wildly different from what they do currently, but why not have a preseason game against an FCS opponent? You have preseason NFL, but maybe there's a reason they don't do that, and maybe it has something to do with school. Because again, ultimately, these are academic institutions, whether we think about it like that or not. These are still colleges and universities, and hopefully most of these students still go to class. And I know it seems like we get further and further away from that with this new era of NIL and how players can make money. And again, I have no problem with any of that. It's just crazy to think that it's basically, it's not even semi-professional. It's professional sports at the college level is what it is, especially with some of the money that the top players in each sport get, with $1 million+ packages and the like for the very best of the best. I mean, that is, and I know not every player gets that, but when you have the ability to do so, that is pro sports. So just my little take on that. I want to address a YouTube comment now real quick. Our old friend Justin Beard, shout out to him. Now, we do get some other comments, and I do appreciate all those, but this one is a question too, so I do want to go ahead and answer his question. He says, much different mindset for this program than when Allen and crew were here. My question is, will these mid-major players be ready to step up to play competitive Big Ten football? I think Cignetti is doing his best to make that happen. Let me go ahead and give you my thoughts, because my perspective is obviously a non-player's perspective. And one thing I'm going to do later this week, so I do plan on having Mitchell Page on Wednesday if his schedule works out to be able to come on. If not, maybe Friday. But this would be a good question for him specifically, because obviously he was a walk-on who eventually became a scholarship player, and he has kind of that. And obviously not a step up from competition to, from like James Madison to Indiana, that type of a thing, but just kind of having that football perspective in general. But here's what I would assume, just as someone who was a former athlete. I don't think the former James Madison guys or anybody transferring in from a lower level program, I really don't think they think about that kind of stuff. I don't think that overwhelms them. I mean, if you hear somebody like Aiden Fisher, Indiana's linebacker, and likely to be their big defensive leader, I don't think any of those guys are worried about that. I think now there will likely be some growing pains in that department when you're playing against bigger name opponents. There's going to be kind of like everybody has their welcome to the NFL moment or welcome to the NBA, whatever it may be. There's going to be your welcome to the Big Ten moment for some of these guys. But there's also going to be moments where these players catch the seasoned veterans by surprise. So I think you're going to see most of the James Madison players live up to the challenge, because you got to remember, and some may see it as cockiness, but these guys carry a lot of confidence from their success at James Madison. And I think that will translate to at least somewhat of a success with Indiana. And I know success is relative depending on who you ask. I'm sure Kurt Cignetti will tell you he's going for a Big Ten title, as every coach in this conference should. But if these players are able to take care of business, beat who they're supposed to beat, win a few games that they're not supposed to, and we talk about all these toss-up games, these coin flippers. If you can find yourself on the right side of those coins more often than not, I think that will kind of prove that this experiment of bringing in a bunch of James Madison guys can work. And I know that's not what he's going to do every year. This is more than likely a one-time thing, because with success comes more of an ability to find guys who have better talent than what you brought in previously. Because that's the next obstacle for Kurt Cignetti, is to prove that he can do more with little. That way, the guys with more talent, whether it be high school players or better transfers, they'll want to play for Kurt Cignetti in the years to come. And that's how you build a successful program this day and age, I feel like. So this is only the first building block. And I'm excited to see pen to paper, ball to field, whatever you want to call it. Because as we've been saying now for over a month, we've been doing this show for over a month, which is crazy. We've been talking about what ifs and the possibilities and theorizing, whatever it may be. And it all comes to an end this Saturday, because beginning next week, we'll be able to react to what happened on the field and maybe sort of adjust expectations or maybe affirm expectations, because this game could go so many different ways. I know the casual fan or the casual viewer will look at FIU and just assume that no matter what, because it's Indiana versus FIU, they should take care of business. And here's one thing. I agree with that. Indiana should, as a program, be able to look at FIU and take care of business. Unfortunately, this is Indiana football, and historically, they have struggled against teams like this. Now, I do believe we are on the right track to where Kurt Cignetti is trying to eliminate that. And this is the first test this weekend. Will Indiana be able to shake off some of those stereotypes where, oh, they're in a battle with a group of 5 team? This is just going to be same old Indiana. Well, we're going to find out. And I do think there's going to be moments during the game where maybe you're kind of, I don't want to say shaking in your boots. I don't know why that phrase came into my head. But maybe early on, maybe FIU scores first. I don't know. Maybe Curtis Rourke throws an interception on the first play, first drive. And one real quick, that reminds me of something. Back whenever I was doing the This Week in Indiana Football podcast, 2-3 years ago, Dustin Schutte and I, shout out to Dustin, we were talking about really this exact same thing, ways that things could really take things in a weird direction to start the season off. It was before Indiana played Iowa. And I said, I brought up this exact scenario. I said, what if Michael Penix throws an interception in his first play of the game? That's exactly what he did. And Dustin Schutte, he says, well, don't do it again. And we laughed, of course. And guess what? Michael Penix throws another interception. So these things that we talk about on these shows, not all of it is completely out of the ordinary. It may sound out of the ordinary, but that's what we've gotten used to in college football, especially when you think of Indiana. There are so many times when I remember back during the Kevin Wilson era, people would call Indiana chaos team. It's because so many of their games were unpredictable. I mean, you remember when they played Ohio State with Xander Diamant, quarterback. Indiana had no business being in that game, and they only lost by 3. They had a ridiculous. I don't even know. They may have even been up in that game if I remember correctly, but that game was wild. And Xander Diamant was far. It was like David versus Goliath with Ohio State. Whenever he breaks off for one of his touchdown runs, and you have the entirety of the Ohio State defense falling behind him, following him, as someone as small and scrawny as Xander Diamant runs in for a touchdown and then does the whole Money Mayweather sign as he scores. That's good stuff. And I'm looking forward to bringing that, not that specifically, but bringing back that ridiculousness to college football, hopefully with Indiana football in a good way this weekend. But yeah, like you got to throw out the rust that I was mentioning with Kyler Staley. You're going to see moments of that, whether that be with turnovers, takeaways, if we're throwing it back to Tom Allen, turnovers, takeaways, whatever it may be, just bad plays in general. You're going to see that. This is not going to be a well-polished Indiana football team, I wouldn't think, in week 1. If it is, then, toot the horn of the hype train, because that may open up a whole new level of excitement if Indiana does look like a well-polished machine against FIU. But don't expect it. I think no matter which team you're a fan of, you should expect issues and miscues and poor executions, especially in the first quarter, and even more especially on the first drive or two, whether it be the offense or the defense. So don't overreact to something you may see that may skew you in one direction. Even if Indiana scores on the first play of the game, you can't overreact to that either, because FIU can do the exact same thing whenever it's their turn. The jitters have to be loosened at some point, and that's when you'll really see what each of these teams are made of here in week 1. And that's part of the excitement of the beginning of the year. There are so many unknowns, and this stuff, the same stuff that we're talking about, the players and the coaches are thinking about. They want to see what they're made of too, and they think they know what they're made of, and they get a chance to prove that on the field this Saturday. So that was a long-winded way of, I guess, answering Justin Beard's question and talking a little more about the Hoosiers as they get ready for everything. So another sip of that brown sugar coffee. Good stuff. All right, let's get into just a couple of more short things here before we wrap up here on a Monday. I did my my fantasy football draft. I did that yesterday, and it was a lot more. I didn't know what to expect. I thought I would not enjoy it, even doing the draft. You heard me before if you've listened to the show enough already. Whenever I do something new, I want to be all in. And I think I'm all in with this. And I wasn't feeling that at first. But just a few decent picks for those of you who may be fantasy footballers yourself. I drafted Jamar Chase first. I had the 8th pick, by the way, out of 10. Just in case, for those of you who may be seasoned veterans wondering maybe if I got the first pick overall, why would I take Jamar Chase? Well, that wasn't the case. I had the 8th pick. My top 3 guys, I'll just give you those. Jamar Chase, Isaiah Pacheco, and Michael Pittman Jr., for those of you who are Colts fans. And then I'll just give you my 2 QBs as well. I got Joe Burrow from the Bengals and Jared Goff from the Lions. So, I don't know. I feel like I've got a pretty decent team. I know I just showed you a smidgen of them. It's far from the entirety of the 16 players I drafted, but we'll see. Hopefully it works out. I'm excited. And, maybe I'll update you guys on how that goes. I really don't know what to expect. Hopefully I win because that's what we all want to do, right? We want to win. What else? Ted Lasso was renewed for a 4th season, I should say. Man, that made it sound like I was talking about him renewing a contract. No. The show Ted Lasso, for those who haven't seen it, on Apple TV. So I don't want to spoil anything. So I'll do my best to explain this. And if for some reason you're somebody who hasn't seen Ted Lasso and you want to tune out for a second, I get it. But I'm pretty sure I won't spoil anything by saying what I'm about to say. But season 3 kind of ended it. Now, you can interpret anything any way you want, but the way that the 3rd season wrapped up, yeah, I guess if you really want to look back at it now, there is a door open for a 4th season, but it was a very small crack. It was one of those endings where it seemed like it was over, but there were enough question marks where you could understand if they really wanted to bring him back, they could. And it appears they're going to do just that. And I don't know that I'll say this. I don't think it needed it. I really loved Ted Lasso, all 3 seasons of it. There were bits and pieces of it that I didn't like here and there, but I don't think it needs a 4th season. Now I'm going to watch it and I'm going to hope it's good. But one thing that would really be a shame is a show that's been this good for 3 seasons. I would hate for it to have a big drop off in season 4 and kind of, I don't want to say ruin the legacy of the show, because that kind of sounds a little dramatic, but just, end the show correctly. Maybe they are going to do one last final chapter and this is it in season 4. I really hope it is. But if you've never seen Ted Lasso, it is it's a very good, feel-good show. And there's not a lot of TV shows out there like that, I feel like nowadays, that are good. There are shows that are out there that try to be feel-good and they're not a good product, I guess I'll say. But this one hits all the right notes 99% of the time. So if you're looking for a show that isn't your typical crime drama, stuff that you see all the time, just anything that it doesn't even have to be crime drama. I just feel like that's a typical TV show trope. And speaking of which, I am a fan of The Blacklist, and I know that show's long over with, but I'm on season 7 with my wife, and we're marching through that as well. Hopefully, we can get to the end of that show. I'm very slow with TV shows. By the way, we've been watching The Blacklist on and off for maybe 3 years. And again, I know, so season 10 is where that show ended, and we watch maybe 2 to 3 seasons a year at most. So it may be a bit before we fully finish The Blacklist. But anyway, Ted Lasso, very good, feel good show. If you need something to warm your heart a little bit up, I would check that out. And here's the thing. I know a lot of people don't like soccer. I've said that before. You don't have to like soccer to like Ted Lasso. Like, obviously it's a show about a team that plays in Europe, and that's the premise, but the show itself is not like that. That's kind of like the gimmick, if you will. Every show has its gimmick before it has like the real kind of issues they want to tackle, if that makes sense. The soccer team itself is just kind of the curtain, and then there's things behind the curtain that take place that's really interesting. So check out Ted Lasso if you haven't before. And one more thing I'll dive into. It's not even really a thing I'm diving into, just one thing I want to mention. Someone commented a couple of weeks ago asking if I was going to do a pick'em, a college football pick'ems. And I thought about it, and with this, I don't want to make an excuse, so I'll just flat out and just say it. I'm not going to do it this year because I'm worried that I won't keep up with it very well, with all the other things I'm trying to do new or, get used to, and with the rest of my other job coming up with all the business with that. So I'm going to shelf the idea of doing a college football pick'ems group for next year maybe, but I will go ahead and say this. We will do a March Madness bracket pool in the spring, I should say. So because by then I'll be way more used to the kind of the busyness of the sports schedule and what I've got to do and how that involves me. And plus, by committing to that now, I can go ahead and kind of plan for it. And I know that that's a ways away, but I can go ahead and have in my mind that, hey, we got to do this bracket challenge. So no college football pick'ems this year. I will continue to share my betting picks at the end of each week, and maybe you can follow along with that, and we can do that together if you're of the betting type. But we'll do a pick'ems group maybe next year, but we'll do a March Madness bracket come that time of year. So I think that's about going to wrap it up for us today. Appreciate you sticking around as always. And be sure to check out everything on HoosierIllustrated.com. Everything Kyler Staley's got going on, Alec Lasley, Drew Rosenberg, the whole staff. Good people, good stuff they write as always. And we'll be back again on Wednesday to do this all again. This has been an episode of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.